Hi all, welcome to DataSphere. Myself Mohan Kumar. I'll be explaining you about structure and cluster components of RAC environment. When we consider dedicated servers, means single instance database environment. So we'll have one database, and for that we'll have only one instance. Users has to connect through instance and work with the database. But when it comes to RAC environment, so we'll have a database. So for which so we'll have multiple instances. So when we say database, is a set of files which are hosted on shared storage subsystem. So shared storage subsystem is the place where database files are stored, means database is hosted. Okay, within which we can have data, different type of data. So then whenever users has to work with the database, unlike single instance environment or dedicated server, so we'll have multiple instances. So hosted on different nodes actually. So we'll have multiple nodes. For example, here we got two instances hosted on two different nodes. You can call the nodes by any name and you can give a name for your instances. So instance 1 on node 1, instance 2 on node 2. And each server has to interact with each other. For that we got a component called as interconnect, a communication facility between nodes. So when it comes to RAC environment, we got three cluster components. One is node. We'll have multiple nodes, two or more nodes in RAC environment, and we'll have shared storage subsystem. Then we got interconnect. These are the three cluster components in RAC environment, and these components are grouped by a component called as clusterware. So it's nothing but a software and services. Basically, we got two types of clusterwares. One is OSD clusterware, the other is Oracle clusterware. OSD clusterware is operating system dependent clusterware. So OS vendors will provide the clusterware. When it comes to Oracle clusterware, Oracle provides the clusterware. So we got two types of Oracle clusterware. One is standard, okay, which was used till 12c, but 12c onwards we got one more called as flex cluster. So standard cluster and flex cluster are the two types of clusters available. Why this cluster is required is basically to group the cluster components, where we got node, shared storage subsystem, and interconnect are the three cluster components, and those components need to be grouped. So that is grouped using clusterware. Either you can use OSD clusterware or Oracle clusterware. In Oracle clusterware, default we configure for standard cluster, we can convert it into flex cluster based on requirement. Now whenever user has to connect and work with the database, so assume that okay, an user is going to connect to an instance. Okay, so we'll assume that this is transaction 1 wants to update row number 6. Initially checks the data to be available in instance 1. So usually you know that the minimum amount of data that is brought to memory to process is 1 block. So now that block is not available to process this data, but that block is there in database. So now what will happen? So block number 12, version with 12 is there in database only, not in any other instance. Because of this, so what will happen? Server process which needs the data is going to bring the data from database. Okay, we'll use it here. So for example, block number 12, version 12, row number 6. Okay, in our case row number 6 value is 20,000. So is updated. Okay, assume that okay, 20,000 has to be updated to 30,000 is the request. So will be updated. Anyway, before updating, so the previous data will be maintained in undo area. Now, so this version will change. So assume that okay, a couple of changes will happen. Okay, and version will be changing to a newer version. So some like for every permanent change, version will change. So now that version is 14, for example. Now one more user wants to work with the database, connects to an instance. So here for users, instance is the server. So connects to an instance where that block is not available. Okay, block is not available. Block is there in database, but it is not the latest version. For updates, always latest version is given. So through interconnect. Okay, now server process which needs the data can't bring it here. So now earlier what used to happen is, who has brought that block is server process has brought the block. Now server process can't get the block from database because that is not the latest version. In that case, what will happen? A request will be sent to an instance in which the data is available. Okay, so through interconnect, request will be sent, message will be sent, need the block for modification. Now this version of the block will be transferred here. Okay, so block transfer will take place. Now assume that this request is for updating row number 8. Okay, so that is why the request is sent to the holding instance, so in which the data is available. So block number 25, block number 12 is having row number 8 also, which is there, brought to image is brought to one of the instance. Now it is transferred here, or the block will come to the other instance. Block number 12 with row number 6 updated data 30,000, and row number 8 what are the data available. In our example 25,000 is brought. The request is update 25,000 to 40,000 is a request, for example. Now this will be changed to 40,000, but before modifying, okay, before modifying, this will be changed to 40,000, but before modifying, undo data will be maintained. Here it will maintain 25,000. So now who is going to do this transfer of message and transfer of block is RAC does this. RAC will do this. So this is how the interaction will happen. So because of this, it will act as one instance for a database. So real application cluster. Cluster means what? Grouping. Your Oracle has grouped instances to provide resources to applications. That's why it is called as real application cluster. Okay, so this is the structure which we see with respect to RAC. So we'll see the same structure from the other angle, so that okay, we'll come to know what are those components should be there in each server. So when we look into the structure of RAC environment, so here we'll have two nodes, for example. We have two nodes, node 1 and node 2. When we say node, is nothing but hardware. So when it comes to a hardware configuration in RAC environment, they can be of different configurations. They need not be of same equivalent configuration. So we don't need to expect for similar configuration. If it is similar configuration, it is better. But even if it is not similar configuration, can be used with RAC. So means node means hardware. So your components are available. On top of this, we'll have operating system. So when it comes to operating system, so it should be there in each server. So what is that expected is it must be identical. Platform wise, version, release, update, patches, tools, even tools version must be identical. So we can't go for unsimilar configuration with respect to operating system. So this is with respect to node configurations, hardware plus operating system. So each node hardware wise will interact using interconnect. So and even operating system in server also interact with each other using interconnect itself. So these are the components with respect to node. On top of operating system, so within your server, so we're going to install a component called as grid infrastructure. We're going to install a component called as grid infrastructure. So will be there in each server. So it is a software. Basically, it has got two components. One is clusterware software, then ASM software. So when we have installed grid infrastructure, we got software which is going to serve our purpose like clusterware purpose and ASM purpose. And whenever we want to use any software, we need to have services will be there in each server. So cluster services in each server. So this is with respect to grid infrastructure. Means we'll have clusterware software and ASM software, and in each server we'll have cluster services and ASM instance. So after installing grid infrastructure software and enabling the services, creating the services, so we're going to install Oracle database software. When we install Oracle database software, so we're going to get database software which is RAC enabled. Okay, which is RAC enabled. So then on top of this, we're going to build RDBMS instance. So we call it as RDBMS instance. So which is we will have a different name for each one of them. So we should be there in each server. So means what should be there in each server is obviously on a node hardware on top of that operating system. So must be identical. On top of that, I will install grid infrastructure software where we'll have cluster software and ASM software, and we need to enable services. This should be in each node. And on top of that, okay, so we're going to install database software which is RAC enabled. Is possible only if you got cluster services running. And we're going to build RDMS instances for our database. So these are the components that should be there in each server. So each server components will interact with each other using interconnect itself. Now what is common? What is common for each node is, so what are the components that we stored in shared sources subsystem? Basically, we want to store two components. One is related to clusterware, the other is related to database. So clusterware wise, we give a name. So for example, we'll call it as DS clust, and database wise also we give a name called as DSDB. So when it comes to database, we'll have database files. So like data files, control file, and okay, other database related files. Then when it comes to clusterware files, we got two clusterware files to maintain different type of information. One is voting file, then is OCR, Oracle Cluster Registry. So these are the two clusterware files. Now, who's going to use these files which are there in shared storage? Maybe it is database files or maybe clusterware files. Who's going to use it? So it is used by clusterware and database instances. Now, whenever it has to be used by cluster services, so for example, so we're going to use cluster services as to use them. We got two ways of using them. One is without depending on ASM. How it can be done is, so they can use cluster file system and they can interact with clusterware files. Clusterware files. So they want to interact with clusterware files. In case if required, so they can use ASM to interact with files. If you store your files in ASM, then there's a dependency to use clusterware files. Then they have to use it through cluster services will use through ASM instance. So the clusterware files are used. Now similar to this, RDMS instance will use database or database files. So it can use it directly if you have stored it in cluster file system. If you are stored in cluster file system, it can use it directly. But in case if it is being stored in ASM, so then it has to use ASM instance to interact with it. So for example, RDMS instance has to interact with ASM instance to continue to work with database files. So this is how the interaction will happen. So means if you are using cluster file system, CFS, interaction can be direct. If you are using ASM, so then it should be through ASM itself. So this is how the interaction will happen. So means what is there in each server is, so we'll have hardware on top of that operating system, cluster software, cluster services are created, ASM software, ASM instance is created, database software, we'll create RDMS instance, so which is there in each server. Shared and common components are database files and cluster files. So clusterware services will use clusterware files. RDMS instance will provide database access to users through, okay, so RDMS instance we're going to access it. In that case, it can be accessed directly if you are stored in cluster file system without depending on ASM. But in case if you are stored in ASM, they have to take help of ASM instance to work with the files stored in shared storage subsystem. So these are the components, the other view of the first configuration. So this is shared storage subsystem. We got nodes, okay, so and each node will interact with each other using interconnect, work with the database and shared storage components. So users can connect through any node, any instance, and work with the database files, for example, to perform their activities. Similar to that, if you see from the other angle, so users connecting through a node can work with the database files, so using any instance to whichever the server they connect. So these are about components of in each server with respect to RAC environment.